Now they're starting to put them back up. So basically one of the first steps is, when we're looking at that issue, is the demographics of what we have right now and what sort of requirements we need in the future based on those demographics. Then, once we have that, it seems a simplicity to say educate an adequate number of physicians and not rely on immigration. I will refer, and I continue to refer back to Canada because that's the example I know best. Canada today, and as far as I know, has never produced enough physicians to replenish its supply or the needs of Canadians. So you say Canada is a well-to-do country, we have lots of physicians, but 25% of physicians in Canada are foreign trained. And we have relied on 25% for the last 50 or 60 years. And we know that with attrition and aging and different work patterns, that we will continue to be a country that cannot supply enough physicians. That is absolutely wrong. We say that within Canada, and we say that internationally through the World Medical Association, is that if you are a have country, the least you can do is produce enough physicians for your country. Now, that doesn't say that some of those physicians will go elsewhere. That doesn't say that we don't very much value the richness of having physicians immigrate to a country, because that gives you a richness to the whole fabric of the medical community. But on the other hand, you should not have to have that go on. So that's what we mean by these things. In Canada, we have this huge sucking sound to the south of us, which is the United States. We lose physicians to there, and therefore the question is, where do we get the rest? And that's where the next guidelines come in. But it's a very important thing to say, educate an adequate number of physicians. Then we have to have ethical guidelines for recruitment that are accepted internationally. We have accepted that in Canada. The WMA has been very strong in saying that we think that individual immigration of physicians outside of their own country should be allowed. That'll be another bullet point. But on the other hand, we should not actively go out and induce or entice physicians to leave countries that can ill afford to have that occur, and we speak out very loudly against that. People want to come, that's fine, of their own volition. That's a different story, but we should not be going out actively recruiting them elsewhere. For example, the largest number of physicians, South African physicians in the world outside of South Africa are in a small western province in Canada. That's because 10, 15 years ago, there was active recruitment. They went to South Africa, they gave them these sweet deals that they couldn't refuse, came to Canada, and they're the largest number outside of South Africa in one small province, and they make up roughly 30% of the physicians in that province from one country. That's unethical. That's unacceptable. That's a perfect example of why we need these sort of guidelines and why they have to be internationally accepted. We also have to say that physicians must have an opportunity to be retrained. Just as Andre had said, some physicians don't necessarily want to leave their country, but they want to change. They want a different type of medicine. The medicine they got into wasn't what they expected. The workload may be a different one than what they want, but rather than forcing them to leave the country, then there should be guidelines to say support for their personal and professional goals within their country and recognition of these. Now, if physicians want to leave on their own, then there's also a responsibility for countries that they're moving to, whether it's within Europe or beyond Europe, is that they must have full, accurate information on their position they're applying for, the legal implications, and very importantly, the regulatory requirements and conditions. Because we hear all the time of physicians who get to a country, and once they've immigrated to the country, then they find out that, well, wait a minute, your license isn't quite right. You have to have 4 years of this or 2 years of that. You'll have to write these exams and all of this, which they were not told before they immigrated. And so, you know, again, and then they end up working in a non-medical job while they're trying to do all of this after having left their home country. Again, it's unethical. If we are going to say migration goes on, which we have to admit, then we also have an ethical standard of saying, okay, what's going on when you get there, and how are you going to deal with that before you even leave your own country? There should be cooperation with other groups and nations to look at this. It shouldn't just be one country, it should be a number of countries to say, okay, migration is going on, but how do we coordinate that? How do we recognize it? How do we deal with it? Because we get into this vicious cycle of if one country is educating physicians and the majority of them leave, then the country begins to say two things. One is, we're wasting our money on medical education, why should we even spend it? Or, even worse, is to say, if we educate you, then you're locked in here and you can't leave. You're indentured, no matter what the circumstances are. And that comes to the next point of there should be very clearly no policies that prevent physicians from leaving their country. Now, there are some instances where there's repayment of their medical education in a number of years. That's debatable, but anything beyond that certainly is, without any doubt, not acceptable. Very importantly, and Andre touched upon this, is that there must be recognition that primary care is essential in all countries. Primary care is the basis of the health system. Family physicians, primary care physicians are required in order to adequately have people access health care, that their health human rights are there, they can access care through these people, and that this must not become eroded. And I think what happens is, time and time again in all countries, we hear the same mantra that health care is a cost. It's a cost, it's an expense, it's a growing expense, it's an increasing percentage of the GDP. We all hear it time and time again, but it's an investment. And without health and without primary care, then your GDP will go down, your productivity because of the workforce not being adequately getting access to health care will go down, the multinationals will not be as productive, and therefore health is an investment, not a cost. That's something which we say time and time again, and governments continue to ignore it because they see healthcare and physicians being part of that as a cost center only and not an investment for the future. And then I'll just briefly touch upon the concept of task shifting. Task shifting